And really, to understand what took place on this trip coming up to Israel, you have to go back to about 6 months before. We were in Strasbourg, France at the European Center for Law and Justice, our offices in Strasbourg, and I had been concerned about stories we were starting to hear in the press about the persecution of Christians in Middle East countries, specifically Egypt, of course Iran. We were hearing stories out of Syria, cases coming out of the West Bank and Gaza. So the predicate to this rescue story that took place out of Gaza over Christmas really goes back to the summer when we were sitting at a conference table in Strasbourg, and the former Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft, who's a fellow at the American Center for Law and Justice, was with us, and we had a group of our lawyers from all over the world in, and we were talking about these immigration and asylum cases and how we could get involved. And as soon as we were sitting at that table, literally within about 20 or 30 minutes, we're in this magnificent conference room in Strasbourg, an email comes in, a request from a couple that were located in the UK, in the United Kingdom.
So we got a phone call and an email that came in, and this is how all of these has happened. It's really unbelievable. As we were talking about engaging in this issue, we had not really discussed it before. We weren't really ready to engage it before because these are diplomatic, legal, political, these involve violent groups.
He was a Syrian who had become a Christian while studying at the United Arab Emirates. She was a Palestinian who became a Christian through Christian television. And they applied for political asylum, they were denied, and they were about to be shipped back. They contacted us and said, is there anything you could do? And we dispatched a team to the United Kingdom. Jordan led the team. We had lawyers, our government affairs staff, our media people were there.
We all mostly came from politics and legal backgrounds. These were people who are in law school, finishing law school, who thought they would be corporate attorneys or thought they would be working back on presidential campaigns, which is where I came from, and going back to Washington to do that. And now we're able to work on these issues, and you've gotten to see a whole team come together. And I think sometimes that's how it happens. People who don't plan on doing this kind of work, who end up focusing the majority of their time on it.
And we ended up winning that case, and that sent a shockwave around the country because it was not just in the United Kingdom, but really around the world. Because at that point, it was the first case where evangelicals or Christians that were from what they call non-Orthodox churches were entitled to asylum status, because the fact of the matter is, for our client in the United Kingdom, he would have been sentenced back. It would have been a death sentence for him. He would have gone back to Syria. They would have killed him and his wife. It's called an honor killing. They're allowed to do it under Sharia law. And that case was then publicized through our media and through, of course, through court opinions. And then we started getting literally inundated with requests for help. They poured in from countries around the globe. And of course, one of the most significant ones, because of the personal side of this, was the case involving Pauline and her family.
One of our assistants, she said, we got this call in, and I think you should probably handle this because I know you just came back from the UK on this, and it was from Lisa, who has been in the television broadcast, who runs a group called Father's House International, which focuses mostly on widows and orphans around the world, in the Palestinian territories, in Zimbabwe, in Guatemala, and other places around the world, places where these widows and orphans really need help. And a secondary focus, of course, is the spreading of the gospel, but it is a very focused aid organization in that sense. And it's a small organization run out of Kentucky here in the United States. What happened was, and that's why these emails that we send are so important, is she was in, I think, Zimbabwe. One of her friends from Oregon, who she knew through her ministry, got the email about the story and the footage that we did coming from the UK about the couple that we had helped get asylum in the United Kingdom. Her friend, who knew about Lisa working with the Ayad family, forwarded it to Lisa. And she had known about the ACLJ and our work before at the Supreme Court in the United States and even in Europe, but she had no idea that we would be engaging this kind of issue. So she cold called.
And they needed help. And they needed help because this was the real classic case of the kind of discrimination and hostility and persecution that's taking place around the globe. In the United States, we should never call religious acts of discrimination, and we have them, obviously. We litigate those all the time. That's not persecution. Persecution is when someone is killed for their faith, and that's exactly what happened.
The body of a Palestinian Christian was dumped in a field near the Zaytun neighborhood in Gaza City Sunday. The man, Rami Ayad, was director of the Protestant Holy Bible Society and had been stabbed to death. Since the outbreak of Intifada 7 years ago, thousands of Palestinian Christians living in the West Bank and Gaza have fled abroad. Since the Hamas takeover in Gaza, Palestinian Christians have been subjected to attacks, Christian schools and other Christian-affiliated institutes.
Rami ran the Christian bookstore in the West Bank, in Gaza actually, and there was one in the West Bank as well, but he was in charge of Gaza. He lived in Gaza, they ministered in Gaza. They were a well-liked family, 30 years old. He had 3 young children, 2 were born at that time. And Hamas decided to murder him. And his crime was that he was a Christian.
I was actually in Israel when Rami was assassinated the year before. And so we knew the story. It was a well-known story, but we did not know how to get in touch with the family or what had happened with the family. For all we knew, they may have gotten out, and it just wasn't a story that was made. So we hear from, I start working with Lisa. By the next week, we're on the phone with the Ayad family. Some of the Ayad family was already in Bethlehem. They had already fled Gaza. Rami's mother, his 2 brothers, his 2 sisters had already fled with their families, their husbands, their wives, and some of their young children into Bethlehem in the West Bank, which is a much better place for Christians. And that's where Pauline wanted to go. She wanted to take her and her children. She was actually, and this is important to point out, Pauline is 30 years old. She was pregnant, just a couple months pregnant, with her 3rd child when Rami was assassinated.
One of the interesting aspects of this afterwards was the reaction of the community, including even some of the Muslim community. There were 10,000 people that showed up for his funeral. When I saw the tape of the funeral, it had a huge impact on me because they were in this area controlled by one of the most militant Muslim terrorist organizations in the world, Hamas. You see this minister carrying this gold cross, walking down the streets of Gaza for this funeral. It was quite a testimony in and of itself, just the presence of the cross during this funeral. But the funeral was very moving. You see this young widow with 3 children. We knew we had to act. We started working with the family through weekly conference calls so that we could develop a relationship with them. And let me tell you something. They were weary at first. And they were weary because they've been trying to get Pauline out of Gaza for 9 months. And they've had various different organizations promise to do something and not deliver. What was increasingly happening was the Islamic cleric in the community where they lived was starting to show up. And when he was showing up, or his wife was showing up, or people from the mosque were showing up, they were demanding custody of the children because under Sharia law, once the husband's dead, the cleric could raise them. And of course, that would take the children being raised within the Christian faith and convert them to Islam. And that was the goal of the cleric. At that point, to me, it's increases. Now it's a life and death struggle for Pauline and her family, both spiritually and literally physically. So we got very involved very quickly. A lot of people were working on this. We have, broad resources and we have assets around the world. A lot of people don't know that about the ACLJ. And we have a special operations unit that operates in Israel. We have lawyers in Moscow, Russia. We have lawyers throughout Europe. We have lawyers that we work with in the Far East. I mean, we have lawyers around the globe. This was complex. We had a diplomatic aspect to it, a legal aspect of it. So you had both the diplomatic, the legal, and then what we did not know was ultimately we're going to need the military, the Israeli military, to be involved in this, and that changed the dynamics.
And she says, for 9 months, God wasn't ready for her to get out. And she thought it was done. But then we came around, and at first she wasn't sure if this was another group telling her, okay, we're going to get you out, and then they'd stop calling. But she said after the first couple calls, she realized we were sincere, that if she wasn't on the phone with us, she was getting emails from us. If she wasn't getting emails from us, she was getting text messages from us, making sure that she was as informed as possible. Now granted, this was a woman who we usually had to work through her family in Bethlehem, because after we talked to her the first time, said, this is all we can talk on this phone number, because it is tapped. It is tapped by Hamas, which is one of the biggest terrorist organizations in the world. It was interesting, we've been working with the family, and how we had done this process is we had a weekly conference call with translators on it. Though some of the family could speak enough English, it was easier to have someone who spoke Arabic on, make sure things were really clear. And they could ask us tough questions. If they needed us during the week, they could, of course, always call. We gave them our cell phone numbers. They had our emails, and sometimes email. It's interesting, but sometimes email and text message are easier. for people who are speaking in their second language, because they can write it out and then read out what you wrote out. And that can be easier than a phone conversation. So we talk fast, we get nervous when we're on phone calls, and you're speaking with all these translators. So we do weekly calls with the family, as well as continually talk with Lisa and one of the family members, Madeline, who spoke very good English, that we could keep contact with. Then things start getting more and more heated. Our goal the entire time was Christmas.
We all came into Atlanta for Christmas, and the calls started coming in about the 20th, really intently, because the idea was to get her out, get Pauline out of Gaza on Christmas Eve, because Hamas was letting a few families out just for a few days.
On Christmas Day, the small Christian community who's left in Gaza is only about 2,500 people. This is out of a territory with over 1.5 million people. The small Christian community could leave Gaza in a special convoy, go to Bethlehem, the birthplace of Christ, spend a couple of days there, and then go back to Gaza. We thought that was our opportunity to get Pauline and her children out, because as long as they got out safely, we could handle the paperwork, the necessary documents to get her immigration status handled, so that she becomes a citizen of the West Bank instead of a citizen of Gaza, which was the key.
So there was this buildup where Jordan was on the phone with them literally 24 hours a day. They were not sleeping because the time, first of all, you had a 7-hour time difference, and there was a lot of reports coming in, and Pauline was getting calls from various government officials. She went there the first time, was denied exit from Hamas, and she was not on a list in Israel.
But then Hamas puts out the regulations. No one between the ages of 18 and 35 can leave, even if they're a Christian just going for a couple days. Of course, that included Pauline. And it was at that point, a distraught feeling, because you realize you're right there, and then this regulation comes out. And that regulation comes out for the purpose of having families divided so that entire families can't flee. Because let me tell you something, at this point in Gaza, everyone knew a bad military conflict was about to start. And whether you supported Hamas, whether you were one of the Christians living under Hamas persecution, you knew that rockets were about to start firing. And when I say rockets, Israeli rockets, like US rockets, and missiles firing on your city. So they knew that there would be a mass exodus of people if they allowed anybody to go. So Hamas puts in these regulations, so she can't get out. We find out this the day before Christmas.
And then it was a miracle what happened. We got a call, I won't forget it, I think Jordan got it at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Get your plane tickets. Get your plane tickets to Israel and come tomorrow. This will be done by Monday. And that was all we got. So, and they said we could tell Pauline that. So we thought, okay, this is not going to be happening for a couple more days, so we'll get our plane tickets. And that was Christmas Day, so we get our plane tickets. And that night, which was actually one of the first nights I thought I was going to sleep, because we knew she was getting out. She felt very comfortable about it now, and she trusted us, and the family trusted us. And so I thought I was going to get some sleep and just kind of try to chill out before flying 13 hours to Israel and get everything together, all the documents I knew we were going to need, our team together. And about 4 a.m., and I kept my phone on, the phone starts ringing, and it's Pauline's cell phone. And she had just crossed the border from Israel, from Gaza into Israel. So she got a call that morning after we were told this will happen by Monday, and told her that. She got a call the day after Christmas, early in the morning, that said you need to be at this border no later than noon.
It was a miraculous exit, a gate that you wouldn't have been able to get through. The day that she got through was basically removed as an obstacle permanently.
So we get this call. She's out. We're on the way to Israel.
Well, we flew out of Atlanta and we flew directly to Tel Aviv. It's about a 13-hour flight. You have that 13-hour period of time where you don't know what's going on. You don't have news. You don't have really anything. You're flying on an airplane, so you don't know what's going on around you. And we land. I'll never forget this. We land at the airport in Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv.
I remember looking at my phone and my friends saying, like, "Are you crazy? What, are you really in Israel?" Because while we were on the plane, a war had broken out. The largest military operation in the Gaza Strip since I've been alive.
We're pulled into this room area. put on the TV, and as soon as the TV's on, I think we've got a picture of this, Israel started its airstrikes in Gaza. I mean, literally as we landed, the war had started.
There is no way Pauline would have gotten out. To this day, while this is showing, she would not have been out yet because Gaza has been decimated. The border crossing doesn't exist anymore. There's no way she would have gotten out. That was the final day, the final moments for her to be able to cross that border. And that was it. That was the last opportunity. Now, we did not know it was it that day when it happened. But let me tell you, when we landed in Israel, we all realized and looked at each other and realized that this would have been it. This was the last chance for months. And this woman and her children would have had to have been in Gaza during the largest military operation after what they had already been through with losing their father and their husband.
We were working with the highest level of government officials in Israel, and they wanted to meet with us. The problem was a war had broken out, so they wanted to meet with us at the front of the battle. I mean, literally at the front of the battle. I think the first time I realized the seriousness of it was we went to an area where we were going to go up on a helicopter. We were literally going to go in a helicopter. And we were all kind of nervous about that because we were going to go up into a helicopter and fly along the Gaza border, and there were literally rockets being launched, but everything was safe.
All right, well, we're getting ready to take off. We're going to go to the region that right now is currently part of a large military engagement by the Israelis.
We get into the helicopter. This was interesting. We get into this helicopter, it lands, we're about to take off, and they go to start the helicopter engine, and it won't start. And I think actually that was God's providence, because when we then drove down to the area, which we did, the rockets were coming, and you could actually see it. We went to a hill overlooking Gaza. You were a mile away from Gaza. I was met by somebody that a lot of people have seen on TV before, Renan Geeson. He was, Dr. Geeson was the primary principal spokesman for the Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, the previous Prime Minister. He was on American television a lot. I'd known him over the years. When I got there to meet with him, I noticed he wasn't wearing his sport coat or a suit, or he was wearing his army jacket. And his army jacket said, Colonel Geeson, Israeli Defense Forces. So I realized right there, this was serious.
Colonel Geeson and, of course, Dr. Geeson, I should say as well.
When it's war,
When it's
peace, it's doctor.
Let me ask you this. We're 1 mile right now from Gaza. You said that this area has received 8,000 rockets in the last 8 years.
Right.
And, of course, this is right in ground zero, coming from Hamas. Now, it was happening under Fatah as well, but it's much more increased now. What is anticipated? Last night was the airstrikes. We're in an active conflict zone now. What do we expect?
Well, I think what Israel expects is an end to the firing of Qassam rockets and restoring a ceasefire, but a full ceasefire, a comprehensive one that will include both the upper ground as well as below ground, because, you know, Hamas has been acting to build up its military force through tunnels where they smuggle weapons, where they put all their rockets there, and the weapons, of course, come from one address, from Iran.
One of the interesting things, and I want to talk about this Iranian connection, is, and you mentioned this, we talked about in Lebanon, when you're dealing with Hezbollah, you're really fighting Syria and Iran. Here, although it's Hamas, the terror group, the terror organization controlling Gaza right now, it's much more than just Hamas that the Israelis are fighting right now.
Yes, I think this is part of this new type of warfare we're fighting in the Middle East, asymmetrical wars which have global ramifications. You see what happened the minute we launched the operation. You heard the whole Muslim world cry out, and this is part of the radical Islamic influence, not only in the Middle East, but throughout the Arab world. At the same time, you know, it's a very difficult decision. What do? Do we restrain ourselves, do nothing now, and then have to fight a bigger war? Or do we take the necessary action required in order to protect our citizens right now? And I think the Israeli government really had no choice. We didn't choose it. Hamas dictated the event. Hamas, and I think with the instigation of Iran. I mean, the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, which prides itself of having liberated Gaza,
Right.
you know, is no longer a Palestinian independent movement, but it's taken hostage by the Iranians.
So we're in a community here. It's a residential neighborhood, and I asked Colonel Geeson this on the way in. These people are living under very difficult circumstances. I mean, literally, folks, if you see right behind me, you see the smoke billowing out from about 4 different locations right now. Very, very significant. Obviously, those airstrikes were significant. Here you are during the day, now coming into evening. What is the morale and the psychological impact of all of this on the citizens right here of Israel?
When Sderot was first built, it was built as a city of hope. Hope for young couples, hope for immigrants. Today, unfortunately, I would say at least in the past 5 years, it turned into a city of fear. And you know, fear is what terrorism is all about. And if you look, the distance between Gaza and Sderot is 1 mile. The real distance between the people of Sderot and those who run Gaza is light years.
Right.
There you have people who really want peace, and they cling to this land and they stay here, and they're asking the government, give us some protection so that we can live at least with some peace of mind. On the other side, you have people who want to tear Israel to pieces.
You saw what happened would be a rocket would launch out of Gaza towards the towns we were at, Ashkelon or Sderot, and then you'd immediately see within seconds an Israeli, usually a helicopter, fire a Hellcat missile, the Hellcat missiles, and you'd see the explosion, you'd see the smoke, then you would hear it. That's how fast it was moving. And then the rockets would go over your head.
There's also been missiles launched, rockets launched, I should say, from Gaza into this area in here. In fact, one hit here today. So this is an active military site right now, a conflict zone. There is, amazingly, you saw kids out in the field playing, but when a missile or a rocket comes in, you have 14 seconds, basically, to get from where you are, right where we are, to where we've been told to go to avoid the rocket causing even more damage.
And then we went to, the first place we went to was Ashkelon.
My dad and another guy, they had gone in to meet with the president of Israel. But just like in the United States, not everyone gets to run into these rooms. They're this is a highly secure, even during this situation. They can't let everyone in. We understand that. So they say, actually, just stay right here. This is going to be, a few minutes.
I remember in the room, there was, probably 50, well, more than that. It was packed full of reporters and cameras. And he was just making a general statement. And then all of a sudden, you hear the his press agent. They knew, I had met him coming in. We talked. I had been with him 2 or 3 times in the past year. So he knew me. And we were walking down, and all of a sudden you hear, and of course they do this with this Hebrew accent, you hear them say basically, be quiet in Hebrew. And then she says something in Hebrew which says, Mr. President, Jay Sokolov is here. And that's how they say it they don't pronounce it secular, it's always Sokolov.
תודה רבה, Jay Sokolov.
Mr. President, it's Jay Sekulow with the American Center for Law and Justice. What's the message you want to convey to the thousands of American Christians supporting Israel right now?
First of all, to the Christian community, Merry Christmas.
He went off on this whole Christmas message, because this was right after Christmas, and I think it's really moving.
It's a peace, it's a celebration of light and happiness, and wish all people, no matter to which religion they belong, that they and their children and our children will be able to celebrate in an air of peacefulness and understanding. We don't have any purposes. We were attacked, and we want to stop the attack. Nobody can explain why were we attacked. What are the reasons? Nobody can explain what do they want. But one thing we can explain, we cannot take it. Imagine any city in the world being fired all of a sudden, day in, day out, with missiles, with rockets. So every day, every government would do it, and we are doing it too. We didn't look for it. We are not trigger happy, but we are decided. And I think we are lucky to have an excellent army. Excellent army not because they know how to shoot, but also how they know how to analyze the situation and do it carefully. We don't think there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We opened the passages for supply, and we have just one purpose, to stop terror.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here's the President of Israel, 84 years old, surrounded by children, and he's talking right to the world through us, which was pretty amazing to see.
So we actually stayed in the van, and one of our security guys, he just kind of turned around and said, listen, a siren's going to go off while we're here. They've been going off all day. When this happens, you have 15 seconds, we'll go to that building. It's about 500 yards away. It's not that close. And when that first, I'm literally 2 minutes after he said that to us, you hear the siren.
Jordan and our other team were still in their van, so they didn't have 14 seconds.
And one of the guys just bolted out of the van. I was actually in the back seat with another guy. We had to like jump over the side, and the last thing I remember was one of the, because at that point they had opened up the building that they didn't want us in because of the security reason. They'd opened it up. And the last thing I remember was one of the IDF soldiers kind of pushing my back. Because I remember it was wet outside, so it was kind of a slippery surface, because I almost had slipped, like just a little bit. And because he had pushed me in, and literally like 2 seconds later.
So we were in the command center, and what happened was the mayor was there, and the deputy mayor, and the head of operations, and the Strategic Command Operations Unit, and they said, why don't you film your television broadcast right here at the Strategic Command Center? We'll open everything up to you. And we literally were in the Strategic Command Center as rockets were falling on Ashkelon.
After that, we'd all gotten back together again. At that point, we were all separate. We'd been in the same buildings, we hadn't seen each other yet. The third time that hit, one hit near us, we were in that Strategic Command Center. That's the broadcast that we show.
What am I doing? Okay. Right now you hear overhead the siren that's going on right now, indicating that a rocket has been launched from Gaza, and at least going towards this area. Now that siren gives the individual citizens here about 14 or 15 seconds to get into a shelter. We're in one right now with the Strategic Command Center, but that's what you're hearing. That noise outside that you're hearing is in fact the siren.
And you see me in the background. And when I point up after the siren, that's when the rocket hit.
I remember I just started filming, and this siren went off. And I think I was in the middle of a sentence where I said, as you hear above me, the rock, and I stopped for a second realizing, wait a minute, that siren went off and that rocket's aiming this way. And we're not in a bomb shelter, we're in this building, but if the bomb went through it and hit, you'd be killed by the shrapnel. So I don't remember if I paused or it was, our energy level and our adrenaline was very high at that point. One had already fallen. So we were seeing this kind of multiple barrages, and then they showed me this map that had all of these marks where the rockets had hit. So what's happened? I know we had some sirens going off just a few moments ago. We were with President Shimon Peres, took us into a bunker. What's happened?
Well, we had a Grad missile fall in one of the major intersections, and there's a map of it right here.
Is this a residential?
Can't show this on
I understand.
Okay.
Is this a residential?
It's a residential, it's the beginning of the residential neighborhoods as you come in from the north.
How did you track to know it was there?
Well, first of all, the Army, the police, the medical services, and the fire department are out 24 hours a day. And that's their job, is when a rocket falls, that they're on the site. They're the first ones on the site.
And you realize that you were literally under attack. You were literally under attack, and we're doing a television broadcast. But it was amazing to see, and you see this in the broadcast when you're talking to the mayor and the deputy mayor and the head of the Strategic Command. They're very calm through this whole process. So we regroup with everybody. We're actually in the Situation Room here in Ashkelon. A few minutes ago, there was a rocket that was launched from Gaza that landed not far from here. In fact, I'm looking at how far. What are we talking about as far as distance?
Talking about distance, so it's only about 5 kilometers from here.
Yeah, so about two miles or so. We're very, very close. We're in the Strategic Command Center where the strategic planning is done. I was asking the Vice Mayor this question. You've had multiple rockets come in here over the last few days, the last months especially, but even in the last few days. When you've got a multiple rocket launch situation where there are hits, where there are lands and areas where people are located, what's the priority? How do you determine priority?
We determine the priorities according to the information that we get. We get this information from people that call us to the central information, and according to our representatives in the area that give us this information. And of course, according to this map that we can identify where there is a weak population, and according to institutes that are like schools, kindergartens, and such things.
They gave us an all clear. It took there was multiple incoming rockets, so we were probably down there 45 minutes. As I'm coming up, I get tapped on the shoulder by one of the government people and says, Benjamin Netanyahu's here. Former Prime Minister of Israel, former Minister of Defense, he served in a number of government party positions. He's also the head of the Likud party, which is the conservative party in Israel. And again, surrounded by the press. And they were all saying, well, you can't really, we had our cameras there, he's not really answering individual questions, except he knows us. A lot of Americans are behind Israel here. How important is it for Americans to continue the support of Israel, especially during this engagement?
You know, it's the same enemy we're all fighting. They're fighting us. They hate our free democratic societies. They want to eradicate Israel off the face of the earth, and so they fire rockets right into this city and other cities. 1 million people are now under rocket fire. About 250,000 children can't go to school. These terrorists target civilians. They hide behind civilians. That's a double war crime right there.
Right.
And you know, civilized countries have to defend themselves against these terrorist criminals, and that's what Israel is doing. That's what any country would do.
You know, it's interesting because I do a lot of international law, and no one's talking about the fact that under every universal declaration, governments have the right to self-defense.
Governments have the right to self-defense, and the terrorists should not be given immunity because they fire these rockets from populated areas. A responsible country, a responsible government tries to target the terrorists precisely, and sometimes they're accidental civilian casualties.
Sure.
But the difference is that they deliberately target schools, deliberately target the innocent, and we, of course, try to avoid innocent casualties. In any case, we should not give them immunity, because if we do, if we fall, if we're duped by the terrorists, then they will use this technique over and over and over again. Fire on civilians, hide behind civilians, and say, we're immune.
Right.
We can't give them immunity. We have to ferret them out, and ultimately we have to defeat them.
Well, hundreds of thousands of Americans have already contacted us, and they're saying they're with you on this, so we appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
It's the same battle, and I appreciate.
Thank you.
I appreciate the support of the American people.
Thank you.
All Israelis do.
All right.
So God bless America and God bless Israel.
Thank you. After our meeting with Bibi, we decided to go to where one of the other rockets had fallen while we were in the command center. And it's amazing because they go there and there's rocket fell, and there was this it was right across the street from a playground and a kindergarten and a synagogue. And the damage was in this parking lot. It hit, and then it just destroyed like 8 or 10 cars. The shrapnel went up about 3 floors, if you can imagine the impact of this rocket. And there were little kids playing around here. That nobody got killed was amazing, because the day before in Ashkelon, somebody was killed by one of those rockets. I met with the head of the police, the primary spokesperson from the police. We're talking to Mickey Rosenfeld, who's the police principal spokesperson here. Is with the escalation now, and the apparently we were here today and heard 3 sirens go, and I guess 3 rockets fell. Is the sense when you're dealing with the community, I know you're giving the warnings, we've talked about that, is it a sense that right now, I look at some of the devastation around here, the impact from these hitting is quite significant. People I don't think realize how significant these rocket hits are.
Absolutely. The area that is being hit, you have within the area of about 30 meters, anyone who is around will literally be killed. That's why it's so important to take cover as soon as you hear the sirens, as soon as you have 30 seconds here in Ashkelon. But once again, if you look at the vehicles and you can see the damage just from the building and the cars behind us.
Let's take a look. Let's walk over this way if we can on this one right here, and I'm going to get you right on this side here. We know the hit spot was right over there, not too far away. They fixed the area where the bomb hits literally in 10 minutes. They covered it. It's unbelievable. They cover it up because they try to get, it's a psychological thing at that point. But you see the devastation, but these Israelis are resilient people. If there were people in this area, and there were kids just across the street, the devastation would have been incredible.
Unfortunately, anyone who is around will be killed, women and children. That's a result of these small marbles, ball bearings, which are being fired and flying through the air. If we look up at the building behind us, you can see exactly where the shrapnel arrived to and the different areas that were hit and the extensive damage. If we look at the window, it's like bullets that go flying through the air within approximately 30 to 40 meters in every direction.
One of the most interesting experiences and really toughest experiences was being in Sderot. Now, it's one thing dealing with the rockets yourself personally, and that's something you have to personally deal with. But when you see what these rockets do to people, to civilians, you're not touring a military base that got attacked or a military battalion that suffered casualties because of a rocket attack. You're going into a nice suburban neighborhood. These are nice homes in nice neighborhoods. And you're meeting with an 80-year-old man whose wife's in bed, kind of suffering through shock, but has lived through this before, though not as directly. And you walk into his living room, and there's a bomb shelter built off this nice living room. So you see this nice living room, and if you didn't see the bomb shelter, it would look like this perfectly nice suburban, something you could see in the United States. And then you look to the right, and our footage has this, and there's this kind of crude cement room, which is a bomb shelter. This is Jordan Second. We're back in Simon's house now on the first level of the house. We were upstairs. We saw the damage the rocket did. last night. But I want to show you something else right behind me. This is what the Israeli government has built for many of the citizens civilians here in Sderot and other cities around Israel who face these rocket attacks. And they've been facing these attacks, folks, and let me make this clear, for the past 8 years. So this is your own bomb shelter connected to your home. I mean, we'll take you inside there in a second just to see, but this is literally in the living room of the home is a bomb shelter connected. And you see how necessary that is when we took you upstairs and you see the damage one of those rockets can do in the middle of night in a civilian neighborhood.
You saw the reality, yeah, that's where we saw the reality of the devastation. The night before we were there, a bomb goes through this probably 80-year-old man's house, goes to the top floor. He has his pictures in his living room of his 2 sons, one of which was killed in the 1967 Israeli war when they were attacked. Of course, it was called the Six-Day War. And this 80-year-old man had his house bombed by these guys, and we've got the pictures of it. There's a shot we have of him that our official photographer took that is just the shot of his face that says the whole thing. You don't even see, in that picture you just see his face. You don't know about the bomb. In the picture you don't see it, but it says everything. It's this unbelievable picture of him. There's pictures of him with Jordan, with us, but there's this one picture that Peter took solo, and it's unbelievable because the pain, I think going back to the loss of his son fighting for Israel's continued independence, was on this guy's face as the bomb went through his house. And I met with one of the famous, General Snee, who is one of the most famous decorated generals in Israeli history. He's also a medical doctor. He was there. He's the former deputy foreign affairs prime minister, deputy minister for foreign affairs. He was a deputy prime minister. I mean, very well-respected guy. We're on the streets of these towns at night, and you see all this going on. And it's pretty amazing. I mean, you see these are guys that are Israeli Defense Force retired, but they are fully engaged when a war like this breaks out, and it's pretty amazing.
Look, I have good news and I have not so good news. The good news is that the air raids of Israeli Air Force were punctual, effective, and inflicted a very substantial damage on the military infrastructure of Hamas in Gaza. These are the good news, and they will continue. But we have to be aware of the fact that by air strikes only and by military action only, the real problem of Gaza will not be solved. The problem of Gaza is that Hamas, by brutal force, took over the Strip and controls it. What we should put an end to is not just the rockets, is the fact that Hamas controls Gaza. To uproot the Hamas, to overthrow the Hamas, just military option is not enough. It requires a comprehensive political, economic, and military.
You know, that's one of the things I was going to ask you, and I'd like to ask you this because it's not just military here. We look at, in my work as a constitutional lawyer, I litigate cases all over the world. You have to look at the political, the legal, and the military aspects. It's a geopolitical situation with has a beyond the military.
Beyond that, Gaza is one sector in a worldwide front between two civilizations. The Islamofascism on one hand and the democracies on the other hand. Israel is in the first line of confrontation with this brutal culture of hatred and religious fanaticism.
They took us to where the rockets were kept, where you saw these rockets that had fallen. They took us to this area. We filmed in front of the area, and these had just fallen in the last few weeks, and there were dozens of them.
These are actual rockets that have landed in this very town. Some of them within the last week. In fact, the ones right over here just came down in the last few days, last few weeks. So you see the nature of what these towns have been experiencing from Hamas. Rami Levy, of course, is a very good friend of ours. He's been on the program with us many times in a variety of different capacities. Rami's helping us here in Israel, directing our efforts on a variety of fronts. But we've obviously had, Rami, a very special, significant situation in the last 24 hours. What's the sense right now in the people that you're talking with within government, within the military? What's the sense of the significance of this incursion into Gaza?
Well, there's two parts we were talking about. The first significance is the fact that children of Israel, hundreds of thousands of children, were under a threat of these missiles. These are very heavy missiles that actually killed children in this city. 3 children were killed, children lost their legs and arms, and for years they were under threat. Children had 15 seconds to run into bomb shelters in order not to be killed or injured, and we've been trying to stop that for a few years.
What's the sense of the Israelis on the street, your relatives? You said you had relatives right in this area. Talk about that for a moment. I think it's important to understand what Israelis are going through living in these communities.
Well, the way I could describe it is, imagine that from the Mexican border, San Diego would be bombarded. And imagine that your relatives living in San Diego on every minute would be threatened by being killed. Their children wouldn't be able to go and play outside. You saw there are no people in the streets here. So if we compare it to any situation around the world, imagine a mile away from you, terrorists shooting at you. So from our perspective, this is a must. It's a must operation. We're not going to stop it until Hamas stops shooting. And yes, they're continuing to shoot as of now. Only today they shot at this very city, but I think it's going to come down.
This is a unique aspect of what we do at the American Center for Law and Justice, the ACLJ, that not a lot of groups can do or talk about.
Well, absolutely, Jay. And we're here regarding the issue of Gaza, whether it's defending Israelis or defending Palestinian Christians. This area is really a problem. And yes, there are a lot of Christians in the Middle East. There are a lot of Christians in Israel. And the ones in Gaza really need protection because the Islamic forces there are trying to crush them.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. And we're seeing that. And literally, that's not figuratively, that's literal. Let me get Jordan in here for a second.
But I want everyone to look really close and see what's behind here. Because in the coming weeks, when this program's airing, you're going to see Muslim activists on TV condemning Israel and saying what Israel did was wrong and saying that they've killed innocent civilians. But you look behind here, not one of these was aimed at a military base or the police station where we're at. These are aimed at schools, they're aimed at children. And that's what you got to look at. If you look down this strip here and you look down, this is at the police station here, but these were aimed at kids. This wasn't aimed at the police station that we're at. This wasn't aimed at the Air Force Base or the other institutions. This was aimed at children. And so when you hear the criticism of Israel the next 2 weeks, and you will, and when this broadcast is airing, you'll see that from the Muslim world, remember these rockets behind us here. And remember that these were aimed at little kids just a couple of miles away from the Gaza Strip.
I mean, you realize your adrenaline is pumping 1,000,000 miles an hour. As we go back to the town square in Sderot, and we're all in kind of different locations there.
I was running in to use the restroom. Some other guys were going to grab some drinks for the car. And it was in a hair salon that let me run in and use their restroom because there was so much media, there was a lot of media around. And I started hearing people screaming. That's pretty uncommon too. Every time a siren goes off, people don't scream. But what happens is when there's a lot of people stuck out in the middle of a road, that's when it's dangerous.
My theory was we should all stay together, but I think we had been through rocket attacks already that day, and so we were, quote, used. This is what happens. You get this psychology where you're used to it. But our security grabbed me. I didn't even know where Jordan was. I think he was going into to the restroom because we're getting ready to go back to Jerusalem. I mean, literally. Stuart Roth was with us. I think was going to look at a newspaper or something. And we're all in these different locations, and I didn't want to be pushed into a bomb shelter where I didn't know where Jordan was. I didn't know where our staff was.
When the siren goes off, and you got 15 seconds, so you count it off in your head. Now after that, you just kind of sit there for a few seconds waiting. Is it going to come down on our head? Is it going to come down on some school? Is it going to kill some kid or some family who's in a bus stop? What's about to happen? And then you hear it.
And they're literally grabbing you and pushing you because you get behind these cement bomb shelters. They're very small. And the one I was in, it was crammed in pretty tight. I mean, there wasn't an inch. The one Stuart Roth was in, they were selling sandwiches. They just are so used to it there.
You wait to hear the explosion. You hear the explosion. You wait a few minutes, and you get in the van and you drive off. And literally, I think that was a different experience too. Here's a guy getting his hair cut. knowing that he's getting his hair cut while this hair salon's open. And on TV is the news, and the news is their city getting bombed and their city getting rocket attacked, but life doesn't stop. And I imagine here, like, what would we be like where we're filming this today if it was possible that every 15 minutes there was going to be a siren going off and rockets coming through? And how would we react to that? And how would that change life here in the United States? Whereas these people for 8 years have been dealing with this 24 hours a day.
The fact of the matter is, as difficult as it is for them to live there, they know that that's where they have to be. I mean, you can't keep running away from out of your country.
We get into Bethlehem, we've got a great security team there, a great Palestinian security team. And it was, listen, this was important for all of us as we continue to engage the international world, to show it's not just about going to Israel, that we are not afraid, and we're also not going to stop from showing you what's going on in the West Bank. And we actually got to go for the first time in our lives, all the times we've been to Israel, to get to see the Church of the Nativity, which is something we had not done before because of security concerns, even in the West Bank. So we made an effort to also visit the Church of the Nativity, which is a powerful site, like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Of course, they've got where it's believed that that's where the manger was set up. And going back on historical records, you could figure out where the mangers were at that time. So that was an important part of our trip as well that day.
I watched as Jordan met Pauline. I took a step back because this was his thing. And I took a step back to watch this reaction, and it was pretty amazing. Pauline, it was a relationship build. You had to build a relationship, and Jordan had spoken to her dozens of times, probably 100 times, more than that, on the phone over a 5-day period. And she knew one thing, that groups around the world were talking about getting her out, and she wasn't out. And we didn't do a lot of talking. We did a lot of moving and legal work and diplomacy, and she was out. So she knew one thing, that when we said we were going to get her out, we got her out. Pauline's reaction is different, but Rami's mother's reaction. Even though she spoke no English, she knew exactly what we had done.
And that's, of course, a very emotional experience for all of us, I think. One is because you saw each other on television, and I saw their news stories. They saw me on our website. I saw them on their website about the family that they had actually put up to give support to Pauline, that one of the organizations had put up. So instead of, though, jumping right into cameras and kind of an uncomfortable setting, we said, let's just go to dinner. So we bring the entire family to a restaurant in Bethlehem, and we've got some translators there so everybody can talk. And in a way, it's able for us, we learned so much more about the story because we had been doing these calls, worried that people may have been listening in, always concerned, hearing some of the sad stories, hearing some of the funny stories with the family, and just being able to sit there, talk, get to know each other. Everyone felt like they knew each other, especially me and the family members. We had spent so much time on the phone and so much time talking. But to be able to sit there and just talk about who we were, who am I personally to them, past just the voice they've heard on the phone, and knowing that we engage these issues, and also about their families and the extended family. The next day we actually came back to Bethlehem. This is our second trip in to do specifically the interview with Pauline and some of the family as well. One of the first things we did was sit down the entire family and have Madeline, who is Pauline's sister-in-law, who was really my main contact in the family because of her English ability. And she's actually a teacher in the local, in Bethlehem at the Latin Patriarch School. And she introduced the family.
I am Madeline. I am the sister-in-law for Murtar Rami. And here's my husband. He's the big brother for Rami. And here my son. Then for the left hand, Pauline, the wife of Rami. And her big son, George. And the small one, Wissam, he's sleeping. And here there is Sama, small one. She's in the house. Here, Rana, the sister of Rami. and her son, Fadi, and her husband in the house. Here, Rula, the small sister for Rami, and the mother of the family. And here, the small brother for Rami, Ramzi, and his wife, Judith, and the son, Majd.
But to go through and say, this is the family. Here they are. Here's the Ayan family.
In the last weeks, we contact with Jordan, with emails, with the phones and calls, and we just waited for phoning him to know everything work with it. And the last 2 days, when he works to go out Bulin from Gaza, we contact together, and we just waited him to say anything for us. And when Bulin, they asked her to leave Gaza now, Jordan called me and he wanted to know everything going with Bulin, and he phoned me for many times, and I feel him as one of us. He wants to know everything going with Bulin. And just I phone him, then he phoned me and phoned Bulin to know everything. Last week when he know that Bulin can't leave Gaza, in that time they put for her, I feel him as a nervous man. He spoke, I want to come to Israel and I want to see what happened with Bulin. But when Bulin leave Gaza, he was very happy and calmed down, is nervous. And we are contact together last 2 days. And we're happy to see him here in Bethlehem. And thanks him what he do for us.
And then I sat down with Pauline. Now, I'd asked Madeline before, and I said, listen, I'm very comfortable with talking to you about what happened to Rami. And if we can't talk about that with Pauline, we understand that. She may not be comfortable talking about what had happened to her husband. It was only a year, a couple months, 14 months before. So it's not something that happened a long time before. And Madeline said, no problem. And when I sat down to interview Pauline, she actually said through the translator, are you going to ask me questions or do you just want me to tell the whole story? So she was prepared. She knew to start in point one. And if you look at the interview, really, you don't need my questions. She takes it all the way through, from his kidnapping, the phone call she got where she did not know he had been kidnapped but knew something was wrong, to when they found his body the next morning. Last Christmas, you were able to get a pass to leave Gaza to come to Bethlehem in the West Bank for Christmas. But while most of Rami's family here stayed in Bethlehem, you had to return to Gaza because you were pregnant and had to have your child with the doctors in the hospital that you had gone to, so you could not stay. You had to return back to Gaza, back to the place where Rami was killed.
أنا كنت أرجع عشان أنا كنت حامل وكنت بدي أولد وكان صعب علي إني أنا أولد وبعيدة عن أهلي ومع أولادي الصغار.
Were you frightened when you knew that you had to return, not just to where the place where Rami was killed, but to Hamas-controlled Gaza, a place that you knew was hostile to Christians, a place you were returning to with 2 small boys while you were pregnant with a girl?
أنا ما كنتش خايفة، كنت مسلمة كل حياتي بين إيدين الرب، وبعرف إنه الرب أمين معي ومع أولادي. اللي صار مع رامي الله سمح في وجوده. اللي صار مع رامي هذا شيء كتير عظيم وأنا كتير فخورة فيه. يعني شخص يضحي بحياته عشان ما ينكرش إيمانه بالرب يسوع، هذا يعني بالنسبة لإلي وللأولاد فخر. هذه القوة اللي أنا أخذتها عشان أرجع فيها على غزة. الرب كان حيحميني أنا وأولادي وأنا كنت واثقة من هذا الشيء كتير.
You knew there were times when you were in Gaza where the children were being threatened.
هو كانت بالنسبة لي كان قبل هيك في جماعة كانوا بدهم يجوا زي كأنهم يتبنوا الأولاد. يعني هي الست اجتني، هي منقبة وقالت لي إنه في شيخ بده يجي يزورك على البيت. أنا الموضوع ده بالنسبة كتير قلقني كتير،
This is when we started working together, about 2 months ago. And then, of course, about the experience of working with us and getting across the border that day. This is a border crossing. But she knew it too, that the next day was destroyed with rockets, missiles, firing from both sides, because it's kind of a no man's land. So Hamas was firing rockets into it. Israel had to fire rockets back. This doesn't exist anymore.
قبل ما احكي عن الاجراءات بدي احكي انه كانت دائما صلاتي تقول يا رب فلتكن مشيئتك في حياتي في خروجي يعني من غزة.
And she takes everyone through the story too of working with the groups and not being able to get out.
أكثر من مرة حاولت جهات كثير أنها تطلعني من غزة بتصاريح، بس كان كله على الفاضي. في كل مرة كان الرب يغلق الأبواب. نشكر الرب سمح إن أنا أطلع من غزة بطريقة كان هو عن طريق المحامي جوردان. كان هو اللي ماسك القضية كلها، وقدرت أطلع يوم الجمعة 26/12 الساعة 2 الظهر من غزة.
And finally, I just want to say that it is great to see you here in person as we've been spending the last few months on cell phones and through text messaging, doing everything possible to make sure you and the children were here in Bethlehem with the rest of the family, and it is great to finally see you in person here.
وأنا كمان.
We almost thought about going back the next day, but we had enough close calls that it was, and we gotten what we needed done. We needed to regroup and finish up Pauline's matter, which we did. And then we flew back to the United States, flew into Atlanta. And then we would watch TV and wonder if this was a different war they were talking about. Because they're talking about Israeli aggression, and I'll never forget, you watch CNN and Christian Amanpour and all of these reporters talking about Israeli aggression. I was standing in cities that were being rocketed by Hamas. I mean, for all I know, they're aiming at us. I mean, they're indiscriminate, but the rockets were landing near us. So, you know, who's the aggressor? Now, Israel, you don't have proportional response. You can't round it. The Israelis are not going to send out a makeshift rocket. They're going to knock out the problem, and that's what they've done and they've continued to do, and that's going to be the only way to deal with terrorists. You cannot deal with terrorists proportionately, which is this UN concept of proportionality. It doesn't work when you're fighting a terrorist.
There are Christians everywhere, and there are Christians who need help everywhere. And I know at the end of the day that even when we may be focusing on these Christians, that our focus here, and we have a very specific focus, but the ripples go through the whole continent, the whole country we're operating in, and for everyone who's persecuted there. If you're persecuted because of your race, or you're persecuted because of your sex, or you're persecuted because of your religion, and it's not even Christianity, and it's a smaller group. Our victories for the Christians that we represent help those who may have no faith at all who are persecuted, or who practice a different kind of faith, for women who are mistreated, for minorities. And so we know what our focus is, but we are looking to expand this into a new global effort, and into continents which we have not touched before.
The fact is that we couldn't have done what we did on short notice, taking 5 people over to Israel. These are expensive operations. This Special Operations Unit, these are expensive operations. You're moving, you've got security, you've got staff, hotels, airfare, no notice. You're not booking these tickets in advance. But it was the generosity of, what I saw was the phenomenal generosity of our members from around the globe that enabled us to do that. It was unbelievable. With the economic fallout that's been going on, when we were broadcasting from Israel for almost 10 days, I mean, the response from our people was unbelievable. On the internet, on the phones, in the mail, it was incredible. Absolutely unbelievable.
And of course, this all focuses at the end of the day is that because of our NGO status, our non-governmental organization status at the United Nations, we're able to bring the stories of this persecution to the forefront so that if these governments don't cooperate and handle these situations appropriately, they know there will be an official report made about what they've done at the United Nations, in the news, and on television, telling the world about how this government is treating people because of their faith. And let me tell you, that alone is almost powerful enough to get these situations handled without having to go to court and without even having to go to the UN. Just these countries knowing that you have the ability to do that can prevent a lot of this persecution and can at least alleviate much of it around the globe.
On this blog that I post on, you'd get this, you know, I'm a Christian, but I'm sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Hey, look, sympathetic to the Palestinian cause? We had 4 people, 5 of our staff, getting people out of Palestinian territories. These were Palestinian Christians. They are Palestinians. So I don't want to be lectured to by the left about helping understanding the Palestinian plight. I understand they're under a dictatorial regime controlled by a terrorist organization, Hamas. Our job is to help the people that want to get out and seek refuge and asylum. It's as old as the Bible itself. So when people tell me, well, it's just some right-wing Israeli Zionist agenda, the fact of the matter is we're protecting Christians under predominantly Muslim-controlled countries seek freedom and liberty. And to me, that is a universal human right issue. So I'm not taking any more lectures by people on the left who have never been. I had this conversation with someone a few days ago who was lecturing me basically on, you don't understand the plight of the Palestinians. I said, how many times have you been to the West Bank? How many Palestinians have you talked to? None. They're watching it on the media. I said, well, I not only know them, I work with them. So don't lecture me. No doubt the Israeli government was critical in this. No doubt that God supernaturally intervened. No doubt that our staff worked really hard. But the lecturing from the left, I'm done with. That isn't, no more, especially on the Middle East. Anybody that wants to talk about it, great. You go there and you dodge the rockets.